Welcome to the Social Justice War Room, the podcast where we discuss social justice in fiction, reality, and everything in between. My guest today is an author of various webcomics, most notably the webcomic Always Distracted Haley Delgado, or ADHD, about a character who has attention hyperactivity deficit disorder. Anyways,
Hi.
please welcome Dave Lerner. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So your comic is very much informed by ADHD, which I have. That's why I kind of spaced out before in recording this. Sorry, that's my bad. That's
Me too. Yeah, you've got two people with ADHD setting up a recording. That worked out well.
Yeah,
but
but
we're here.
I found a lot of solace in reading your comic, and I really like the character of Hailey because while she definitely has a lot of challenges with her condition, she's still portrayed as a likable and sympathetic character, and we're definitely supposed to identify with her and sympathize when she makes mistakes. So
one thing that surprised me is how many people who don't have ADHD, or at least don't say they don't have ADHD, still identify with her. I guess in many ways, many of the symptoms of ADHD are just an exaggeration of things everyone does. I was diagnosed as hyperactive when I was about 6 or 7 when I started school. And that was 50 years ago, back in the mid 70s.
So I'm a decade and a half having ADHD or autism, which I also have.
So do I, actually.
Yeah, or any other kind of neurological divergence, is that people are slowly coming to accept it, but not in like practical ways. So like if you say you have it, you're either expected to be like some kind of superhero who isn't affected at all and overcomes the struggle, or you're treated like you're helpless and you can't do anything. Do you find that true?
You're a real inspiration to us.
Yeah, and it's usually in that kind of voice you use to talk to children.
Yeah.
So like how do you try to confront that with both?
I don't usually get that too much. I certainly don't get as much as people who are physically disabled. And the thing is, I am very, very lucky. My family, my friends, even my boss all know of my condition and all understand. And I've seen from other people, on Twitter and elsewhere, that I am very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, I am in a similar position where I do have a really good support system, and I'm grateful for it. And that means I also feel some degree of responsibility to do what I can to help people in general, because they also know.
Exactly. That's why online I let people know that I have ADHD and autism, because I'm hoping that by being more open about it, I can destigmatize it. But I also have to make sure that I'm aware that I have the privilege. Some people cannot, literally, they're in a bad position where they cannot come out and say it. So since I can, I try to.
Yeah, and one thing I like about your comic is you do 3D models of the characters, but they don't have realistic poses. They are kind of like cartoony and exaggerated, and they convey a lot of emotion that way with gesture and face. So
I use, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so what do you use for?
I use Daz 3D. It's the thing itself, the main program is free, and they make their money because they sell you a lot of extras, which they do. I use there's a Toon, I don't know if plugin is not the right word, but there's a Toon figure that I use for my characters, although I reduce and change that up a lot. Daz and other 3D, they try to get more, they're trying to get more and more realistic, but I don't want it to be too realistic, because it looks, what the uncanny valley is when something's.
Oh yeah, I play
So
lot of video games, and even now that we have like motion capture, there's still a lot of cases where characters fall into that in 3D.
So I try to stay on the early, on the non-realistic side of that, because it looks, if you get too much, partly it gets creepy, and partly I don't have the computer power to do something that really looks good. I use a laptop.
Yeah. So this hasn't been something that's really affected me because I still do a lot of it by hand, even if it's on a screen instead of on paper. But it does seem like with the comics people do, there would be issues that come with like needing to do this elaborate 3D modeling work and not having the computer power or resources to do it. Have you found that a problem, or
Not with this, not
Yeah.
with well, if you notice, I don't use realistic backgrounds. I actually use Inkscape to make my backgrounds.
Oh, nice.
Partly it's like, I like the unreality of it. Partly it's I don't have the assets. I haven't bought that much stuff from Daz to get, all sorts of realistic looking apartments and stuff. And again, it's part of it is computing power. If I do have a background, it takes much more time. So it's a lot faster.
Yeah.
Just to.
Well, your backgrounds do, like, I noticed some shifts in the colors to convey different emotions, and I think they pair well with the figures. So
Thank you.
Is it something that is still fairly time intensive?
Backgrounds don't really take a lot of time, especially since I've been doing them for a while. I know how to do them. It does take, it takes a few minutes. The biggest thing is when you create a new character. That's what's the most time consuming, especially since with this, I want to be very, it took me a while to make sure that the characters looked as close to what I wanted as I could get them. Setting the pose can sometimes be tricky, especially if you have like interlaced fingers, or if someone's holding something or touching something. That can be a bit tricky. And then the rendering doesn't take too long on my system. So
That's
and
good.
the stuff in Inkscape doesn't take too long, except for actually setting up the word balloons and stuff.
Yeah, well, I think I've learned by doing webcomics that the hardest part is simply producing stuff and producing it consistently. So I'm glad to know you have kind of a system for what you're doing.
I have a system, but producing stuff consistently is, I wish I was a lot more consistent, but I do what I can.
Yeah.
And if someone can't accept that someone with ADHD doesn't have a consistent schedule, well, that's on them.
Yeah, it's hard. Like, for other people I've talked to, living in the modern world is extremely difficult because, like, there are theories that, I don't know how accurate these theories are, that ADHD is advantageous evolutionary for like being in a hunter-gatherer environment where everything's trying to kill you and you have to have situational awareness. But
I've heard that. I've read that very, very recently. And one thing they say about people with ADHD is when there's an actual emergency, an actual crisis, we can focus on that. So, we're not as distracted when there's a saber-toothed tiger coming at us. We don't say, hey, look, a squirrel, while running away from it.
Yeah. And so one thing about your comic is Haileys partner, a woman named Fiona, often plays the straight man to her.
Yeah, it's funny. She plays the straight man, even though she's a gay woman.
Oh yeah, I see what you did there. Nice. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. She plays the foils. She's the neurotypical that thing that Hailey bounces off of.
Yeah, and I like that she is definitely a strong source of support for Hailey, but also that, like, there'll be moments when she gets sucked into Hailey's shenanigans.
That's exactly what I've been aiming for. So I'm glad you said it like that. That's exactly. I wanted to be, that they are good for each other. It's a strong, supportive relationship. But I also want them to be realistic enough that Fiona gets frustrated sometimes.
Yeah. And
So,
it's definitely something that, like any relationship, is going to be a lot of work. I
mhm.
say this from experience, having been married for a decade, and it, I'm not saying this to throw any shade at my wife, the absolute opposite of it. It's just the way it is when
Mhm.
learning to deal with people in general, especially when you live that closely. So I'm glad you could have a realistic way of it. Also, one comic has Haley note that she doesn't feel any different than normal during the pandemic in terms of that kind of mental fog that Fiona and many others were dealing with upon lockdown.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I know what one you're talking about. That was yeah. Fiona is like, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, Fiona is on the computer. She's like annoyed with lockdown. She's like looking forward to everything, getting back to work and everything. And he's like, I can't wait for the office to open. Days blur together. I can't tell if something happened last week or 6 months ago. And Haley's like, welcome to my world. Is
Yeah.
that the one you mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a massive shift for everyone, but
Yeah.
to have that kind of experience with not sticking to regular schedules, was that something that you felt
Well,
during?
I would, well, I do have a regular schedule. I work as a medical transporter. I bring people to medical
Oh,
appointments.
that's great.
And getting them there on time, picking them up on time is very, very important, which is a lot of fun when you have time blindness. But
Yeah.
but when the pandemic started, I actually was on unemployment for a few weeks, few months, something like that. So,
Yeah.
but isolating, not going out that much or whatever, that was easy for me because I don't generally do that anyway.
Yeah, me
So
neither.
that part was easy.
Yeah. And it's, well, since then we've shifted from a pandemic where we're locked down to a pandemic where we're pretending there's not a pandemic,
Oh yeah.
unfortunately. And that's,
Or the one person close to me has gotten COVID, and I am really, really unhappy about that.
I'm really sorry. I hope you both are okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm not. Wasn't. I wasn't actually with them at any time, so I had no contact.
Yeah, but
So,
still, it always hurts when someone you care about gets it.
uh,
And of course, we're in the state where the vaccine, since we didn't get herd immunity on account of some assholes refusing it for culture war reasons.
that whole thing is based on one man's racism.
Yeah.
Can I go off on a bit of a rant here?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, when Obama left, Trump's specific goal was to undo everything he did because, well, Obama was a successful black man. So Trump's specific goal was to undo everything Obama did. Obama set up I forget what it's exactly called, but it's like a pandemic response, an agency specifically designed to say, okay, people are saying pandemic is most likely to happen. What are we going to do? Well, let's set up this office, see what we're going to do. Trump's like, he set it up, I'm taking it down. So he had no preparation, and not replace it with anything. He had no preparation for when the pandemic hit. So he tried to say, oh no, it doesn't exist. Oh no, it's not that bad. Oh no, masks aren't needed. So
Yeah.
the whole anti-vax routine is based on one man's racism.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Well, there's also like some quack doctors like Andrew Wakefield who promoted this kind of anti-vaccine paranoia, and of course the people who tied vaccines to autism with no
Oh yeah,
credible evidence.
which was specifically done by this one doctor. Was that Wakefield?
Yeah, I think so.
Who wanted to promote his own autism cure, quote unquote. So he specifically set up a study and faked the results that vaccines cause autism, and since it's better for your kid to be dead than autistic.
Yeah.
You can't see me, right? I don't know if you can hear my feelings about that. So that's what the whole thing started from there. That was just plain forward greed.
Yeah.
Greed and
And
racism
yeah, that's,
and ableism. That causes so many
yeah,
problems.
they really go hand in hand. There's always like some kind of financial incentive to the bigotry we see.
That is true. The people, you do, a lot of people do benefit from the racism there and from the ableism, and that makes it tougher to fight.
Yeah, and of course you've heard all the stereotypes of autistic people like not caring about others and being disconnected to a sociopathic degree. And
I believed those stereotypes until I was actually diagnosed, which is, made my diagnosis. The thing is, when I was told the symptoms, the actual symptoms, it's like, that makes sense. I've learned to cover up some of that. Masking is, the right word. And I've
right,
learned to adapt and to, create strategies on not even realizing it. But, I like when I was a kid, I saw the movie Sunrise and I saw Rain Man. And I actually worked with severely autistic children for during as a summer job. So I knew what autism was. It was sitting in the corner humming. It was knowing, being able to solve complex math problems, but not being able to drive. And that wasn't me.
yeah,
So,
and
part of what I
that,
want to do with ADHD, with the comic, is to show people what this is really like, what this is really about. Because with various neurodiversities and issues, people don't actually know what it's about.
yeah, I definitely feel you. It's, but a lot of times I've felt like the opposite is true, that autistic people have a very strongly defined sense of right and wrong.
That's actually a symptom, although it's worded as in a negative way, that autistic people are too concerned with with justice and stuff. So it's actually classified as a problem, as an issue, because autistic people have difficulty accepting injustice.
Yeah,
Like, okay, so that's how you want to word it, okay?
and like on a day-to-day thing, there's often some degree of injustice you just have to deal with as a means of negotiating with other people, like if you get off in line or cut off in traffic. But then of course there's also the monumental of injustice baked into the system we live in.
Oh, yes.
And like a lot of times the injustice doesn't appear monumental assholes like Trump. It's people who do things from a
Yeah,
position of
you can
power.
understand Trump. There's always one person who's going to be like that. It's the fact that almost half the country supports him is what really gets to me. If it was just one person acting like that, people would say, "Oh, that asshole, yeah." But nearly half the country is like that.
Yeah, but it's in terms of politics, but in terms of like sheer numbers, like Trump did not have a majority. He did not win the popular vote, but of course things are rigged so much and they're so with gerrymandering,
Yeah. But
that
even if you put that aside, he still got like 70 million votes.
yeah, and that's 70 million people who are embracing a platform of like open cruelty and hatred, and they're all still here even though he's been deposed and taken off of social media, something they could have done so much sooner. But
They
he
waited until he was
was,
almost out of office before they did that. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the kind of thing, like people like this, the heads of these social media companies who just seem so like chill and rational, and they have like they present themselves as these visionaries, and we can't understand their reasoning, but they just let things like this happen.
One thing I've noticed, and I don't know if this is just a selection bias or something like that. I follow a lot of people who are autistic or ADHD, both, and also heavily into social justice, heavily liberal and Democrat. I don't know if that's, I don't know what the overlap is, if most autistic people and if most neurodiverse people are liberal, or what, or if it just happens to be the ones that I follow because that's what I look for.
Well, the saying goes, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person.
Yes.
And I've seen several people on the spectrum who've gone fully into the online right wing and into guys
Yeah.
like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson.
Mhm. I've read an argument, I don't know how true it is, that says that Ayn Rand was autistic. She was never diagnosed or anything, but people look at that. Although I'm wondering now if people might just be saying that she has a lack of compassion, and like you said, that's a stereotype. So I'm wondering if that's part of it. So it's very difficult though to diagnose someone long distance though.
Yeah,
To
it,
diagnose someone, it's difficult to it's difficult enough to diagnose someone when they're there and cooperating.
yeah, that's very true. And so with all this injustice that's perpetrated daily and having such a strong sense of personal right and wrong, like how do you deal with all that anger and sadness at the way things are?
Avoidance mostly. I'm joking there, but to some degree I'm serious. I'm on Twitter and I just stop for a while and concentrate on something else. I mean, I do what I can. I don't do as much as I probably could. I do support, social justice. I'm not as much of an activist as I'd like to be. Just it's a question of energy to some degree.
Well, we're all trying.
Yeah. So I see. I don't actually. You've noticed I don't actually put a lot of politics into my comic. I've got the main characters are lesbians. One's black, one's Hispanic, but I don't. I mentioned they got their COVID shots. They were not, nothing against it or anything. It took them a while, but that was just because of the executive dysfunction.
Well, we're in a point where simply being black or Hispanic or lesbian or even vaccinated is political to some people. But so I mean, it's a wise decision to not go into the more overt stuff because you want to reach as many people as possible. But
and this may be an odd thing to say if you read some of my Twitter stuff, but I don't like confrontation. I don't like arguments. I don't like, voices raised. I don't like, and I'm not that persuasive when it comes to an argument. I mean, I know what I'm saying, but I get caught up and, don't always remember the fact and everything. So it's like, I don't like to get into debates.
Well, I personally think debates are mostly useless, and a lot of it isn't about arguments. It's just about who can talk faster and more forcefully.
And I can't talk that fast and that forcefully. I just don't have that. So I'm not a.
Yeah. And so like going forward, do you have anything more planned for the ADHD comic?
Well, I'm hoping to keep to a schedule. I want to get on Patreon. I tried it for a while, but it didn't quite work out. But when I get some more, if I can get some more followers and stuff, I hope one day to put it on Patreon. And I actually plan to have maybe some not safe for work stuff on there. It'll still be tasteful. It'll still be, in character and everything, but it's not, but it won't be stuff that's, G-rated.
That's fine. I mean, my policy is as long as it's consensual, go for it.
Yeah.
So
but that's, I said, that's what, after I built up some stuff, I'm hoping, I'd like to sell like buttons and, other merch and stuff based on it, but that's quite a bit in the future.
Oh, cool.
And I do hope to, right now, I just want to, try to keep to a regular schedule and try to, put the comics out there and hope that people like them.
Yeah. For anyone, myself included, listening who has ADHD, like, what are some things that you've found helpful in managing it on a daily basis?
Well, one thing that helps is to actually recognize that you do have it and recognize some of the symptoms. Like if I get rejected, if I feel like I'm being rejected, it's like, okay, this is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I feel it bad, but that's because I have this condition that makes me feel bad. And it's like, if I miss a deadline or whatever, it's like, okay, I have this that's causing that. I'm not bad, I'm not lazy, I'm not stupid, I'm not, all the
Yeah.
internalization stuff.
Yeah.
One thing that helps is to recognize, okay, I have this particular condition. It's neurological, it's chemical. It's not my fault. That's how I put it.
Yeah. Which, of course, I'm going back to that comic where Fiona gets into an argument with Hailey and deduces that Hailey's mistake is not the result of ADHD. So yes, she is at fault.
Yeah. It's like because I was wondering, am I blaming too much stuff on the ADHD and how much is it? So I want to explain. I mean, people with ADHD, people with autism, as you implied earlier, can still be assholes. We can still do stuff that's mean or rude or whatever that's completely unrelated to our condition. You mentioned before, you met one autistic person, you met one person.
Yeah.
So we still have, we can still be jerks, basically, is what I wanted to say with that.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true, but it's always a work in progress. I guess that's all I can say about my own experience living with the hand I've been dealt, that there's no happy ending. There's just finding ways to live with it and make it work to your advantage.
Yes.
And with that note, we should wrap up. And this is Dave Lerner, and you can check out his comic, Always Distracted Haley Delgado. I'll have the link in the comments. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.